Genesis chapter 14. I might have told you the wrong chapter. I don't know if I did, if I just said Genesis. Genesis chapter 14 is where we'll be tonight. You can remain standing. We'll read our chapter here in Genesis chapter 14, continuing our series entitled Beginning with God. See, life starts with God. If we don't get it right on God, then everything else in life is going to be messed up. And so we want to make sure that we know who God is, and specifically not who we think God is, not who society says God is, but who God has revealed Himself to be in His Word. And so we've been making our way through Genesis. We moved into the life of Abram now, and we're going to read chapter 14. And we'll read the entire chapter here. I'm not going to make comments as we go through because I'll do that in the course of preaching, and I know it's a lengthier chapter here, so we'll just make our way through here. There are some strange names in here, names you wouldn't want to name your kids. And so we'll try to do our best as we make it through those together. So Genesis chapter 14, verse 1. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. See, there must have been so hard of a name for the king of Bela that even Moses didn't want to write that down. And so he just left that, the king of Bela. Verse 3, all of these were joined together in the vale of Siddim, which is the Salt Sea. 12 years they served Kedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. And in the 14th year came Kedorlaomer and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaims in Ashtaroth, Karanaim, and the Zuzims in Ham, and the Emims in Sheva, Kiriathaim, and the Horites in their Mount Seir, and El Param, which is by the wilderness. And they returned and came to Enmishpat, which is in Kadesh, and smote all the country of the Amalekites, and of also the Amorites that dwelt in Hazezon Tamar. And there went out of the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same is Zoar. And they joined battle with them in the vale of Siddim, with Kedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, and Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar. 4 kings in a battle with 5 kings. Verse 10, and the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountain. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all the victuals and went their way. And they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. And there came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and brother of Aner, and these were confederate with Abram. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. And he divided himself against them, and he smote his servants by night, and smote them, and pursued them to Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the people. Now, all of that in chapter 14 is to get us to, or all of that so far is to get us to verses 17 through 24. Here's really the point of this chapter. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him, speaking of Abram, after his return from the slaughter of Kedorlaomer, and of the kings that were with him at the valley of Sheva, which is the king's dale. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thine hand. And he gave him tithes of all. And the king of Sodom said unto Abram, Give me the persons, and take the goods to thyself. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich, save only that which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men which went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them take their portion. The title of our message tonight is 2 Kings, 2 offers, but only 1 choice. So may God bless you in His word. You can be seated. We'll get into our message tonight. In a year of rising inflation and gas prices and everything, we're looking really for any way to be able to scratch and claw and try to save money, right? I've got one of the simplest ways to save money is to download apps that have offers on them, thinking specifically of restaurants. And so on my cell phone, I've got a whole file just for restaurants like Chipotle and Qdoba and Wendy's, and Starbucks is even on there. I don't know why, but it's on there. And then Cafe Rio and BJ's, different places that we frequent, try to save up the rewards points and also try to see the offers that they're going to extend out. And so even last night, as we were trying to figure out what we were going to eat, I was like, okay, well, my birthday's this month coming up next week. And so I'm going to see if I got any birthday offers. So I started going through my emails, started going through my apps. And the best thing that I could find was a free appetizer at Chili's. And so we ate at Chili's last night. So what I'm trying to say is that we made the choice based off the offers available. I recently had been hearing some ads and ads on Facebook as well about an app called Get Upside. And you hear it on the radio and they're talking about how, you get cash back for just filling up your gas tank. And I'm like, okay, well, I know I've got some places where I get a discount on things, but this sounds good to be able to get some cash back for whatever I'm getting gas for. I mean, now that I've got a diesel, so we're looking at $4.50 to $4.99 a gallon, depending on where you get it. And so I downloaded it, started checking it out, and found that it's got different offers right now, introductory until I use this first one. But I found offers up to 40 cents off a gallon or 40 cents cash back per gallon. And so that's a good chunk of change that they're going to give out. Now, I don't know if it's going to work or not, but if you're interested in that, I'll do some advertising for them. Let me know. I'll send you an invite. They'll give me 1% of yours as well. So that's kind of the situation we're in, trying to just save money however we can and wherever we can. But now, when it comes to getting gas, I'm going to open up the app. I'm going to see, okay, which one's closest to me, which one's the most convenient, but also which one is going to give me the best offer. And so if I've got 15 cents cash back at this one that's a mile away, but there's one that's 3 miles away that's going to be 40 cents cash back, then I'm going to go to the 40 cents. So my choice is going to be based off the value of the offer. Well, let me say this. I'm thankful that you're here tonight. I'm thankful that you came to church. See, there's a lot of things you could be doing tonight. You could be sitting at home comfortably on the TV, or on the TV. Hopefully you're not sitting on the TV. On the couch, watching TV. You could be sitting at home playing games with your family or reading a book or just getting some rest, getting ready for the week. I mean, I realize that for a lot of people, Sundays are their only day off work. They might even work 6 days a week, or they might take Saturday to run all their errands, and Sunday would be the perfect day to rest. But you've chosen to be here, and that's a good choice. You've chosen to honor the Lord, and I'm very thankful for that. I'm thankful you've chosen to worship at Boulder Valley Baptist Church. We're a new church in the area, not even a year old yet, and there are a lot of churches here in Boulder County, not just in Boulder, but in the county as well. And there are probably churches that at this stage, while we're trying to grow, that might have a little bit more to offer you, but you chose to come to be a part of this church, and I'm so thankful for that. Life is going to be full of choices. There are options on the table everywhere for us. And there are lucrative jobs with great salaries, benefits packages, and retirement packages out there. And there are they offer you everything that you ever wanted and everything that you wanted to do. There are good jobs like that. There are relationships that offer to enrich your life, to be able to enhance your life. They also are relationships, and what I'm talking about right now is I'm not talking about in the sacred world, I'm talking about in the secular world, this world's system, as we'll be talking about tonight. This world offers you all kinds of relationships that could gratify the lust of the flesh, and they promise all these wonderful things for you. And there are friendships, there are parties that give you all kinds of offers. And so as you consider our world, there are all kinds of options on the table, and the world is extending its hands out to you, and it's saying, You should take all this. It will enrich your life. It'll bless your life. Your life will be much better if you'll just go after all the goods this world has to offer. And yet there are times when the world holds out its hands to you, and it says that these lights have motion sensors, so they'll go off on occasion, and we'll try to fix that. Just want to prepare you for that. But you've got these times when the world holds out all its goods to you right there in its hands, and God says this: refuse them. Don't take that particular job. There are times, not every time, but there are times God does that. There are times God might step into your life and impress upon your heart and convict you. Don't take that particular relationship. He might say, don't take this particular offer, this particular opportunity, because while all the options are on the table and promise to bless your life, sometimes what the world offers isn't all that it's cracked up to be. And God says you ought to refuse it. Well, here's a question for us tonight. Why should you rest in God's sufficiency when the world's holding out to you all its goods? Because they do look good. And sometimes the things that God promises us, the things that He offers to us, might be off in the distance. They might be a little bit futuristic. They might be something that we can't grasp a hold of right now. But I've got this right here, right now. And yet when God comes and speaks to you and says, I want you to rest in my sufficiency, why should you be willing to do that? As we followed Abram's life thus far, we've seen that he and his family have faced their fair share of choices, their fair share of offers. God appeared to Abram in chapter 12 and He offered him a family. He offered him to be the father of a great nation, and He offered him the land of Canaan. And He said, I'm going to bless them that bless you and curse them that curse you. He had this great offer on the table there for Abram, and he gladly took it until a famine hit. And when a famine hit the land of Canaan that God had promised, he set his eyes upon Egypt and he said, you know what? Egypt might have a little bit better of an offer for me. They've got the Nile River there, and so they're not dependent upon the seasonal rains. That water comes in every year and it floods and everything's green and lush, and I could be prosperous there. And so he headed to Egypt. Found out it wasn't all it was cracked up to be. He returns to the land of Canaan. A strife breaks out, as we saw last week, between his nephew Lot and his herdmen and Abram's herdmen. And they're fussing and fighting because you've got both of their substances and all their cattle and all their herds. On top of that, you've got the Canaanites and the Perizzites in the land that already have claim to that territory. And so there's a struggle here, and Abram comes to his nephew and he says, I want you to take whichever part of the land that you want. So he offers him, you go whichever way you want. And it says that Lot lifted up his eyes upon the plains of Jordan, and he saw that they were well watered. He saw that it was like the garden of the Lord, that it was just like Egypt, where he had gotten all of his substance in the first place. And he said, you know what? I think I'll take Sodom. And so he goes and he pitches his tent toward Sodom, toward a place that promised him wealth, peace, and security in his life. When Lot chose Sodom, what did God do for Abraham? He gave him another offer. He said, I want you to lift up your eyes, and I want you to look from the north to the south and from the east to the west, and every part of the land that you see, I'm going to give it to you. And I want you to look at all this dust that this famine has created here. I'm going to make your family as vast in number as every particle of dust that you can see. I'm going to make you a great nation. God reassured that offer to him. And now as we come to our text in chapter 14, Abram's faced with another choice. He's faced with a choice of whether he's going to take the goods of Sodom that are being offered by the king of Sodom, or if he's going to rest in the sufficiency of God. See, he faced the same question that you and I face today. Why should I let go of the goods of Sodom that are right here, right now, in exchange for the promises of God, and a God that maybe I've heard His voice, but I've never seen Him, and I don't know exactly what He's going to do, and I don't know even when this is going to happen. I mean, he's almost 75 years old, or 90 years old now. His wife is 75, and God's saying, I'm going to give you a bunch of kids. And he's thinking, I don't know about this, but we know how he responded. We read it. And he chose to rest in the sufficiency of God. And I want to address this question tonight. Why? Why did Abram choose to rest in the sufficiency of God rather than have the goods of Sodom? We read here in chapter 14 that war had broken out. War between these 5 kings that were from the valley of Siddim, and they were, that was right underneath the Salt Sea, or the Dead Sea as we call it today. And so they had these city-state kings there. It wasn't kings over a country. It was kings over individual cities at that time. So you have these 5 cities, and their 5 kings over here. And then in the far east, in the land of Shinar, which would be modern-day Mosul, Iraq, that's where they're at the tip of the Persian Gulf there. These 4 kings there, led by Kedorlaomer, they come down and they begin to drive a conquest into the land of Canaan. And they conquer these 5 kings and they bring them under subjection to Kedorlaomer. And it tells us in verse number 4 that they served Kedorlaomer for 12 years. But in the 13th year, they rebelled. They rebelled against him. So now they're rising up and they're saying, we're not going to pay tribute to you anymore. We're not going to be at your every beckoning and calling. We're going to be on our own again. We declare our independence is what they had done. Well, obviously Kedorlaomer and those other 3 kings, they didn't like that. And so they made their way back from Mesopotamia and they come back to this area, and they actually enter through the northeast in Syria near Damascus, and they make their way south on the east side of Jordan, and they come down and they're conquering people and they're claiming more territory to themselves. And then finally they come to the Vale of Siddim, and there's a face-off here, a battle. But it really wasn't much of a battle, because if I could say it this way, Kedorlaomer really put the whip down on them. And so they were fleeing for their lives. And it tells us in verse number 10 that the Vale of Siddim was full of slime pits. These slime pits were like asphaltic tar. And so there were these deep wells. This is a same word. The pit there is for the wells that they would dig deep down to be able to get water. So it was that kind of a pit. But at the bottom, instead of it being water, was tar. And so what it tells us here in verse 10 is that the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah, while they're running for their lives, unaware of their own territory, they fall into a tar pit. It actually worked out well for them because they survived as a result of that. And the rest of the people fled off to the mountain. Well, now that Kedorlaomer and his cohorts, his alliance there, they've figured out, okay, well, they're down in the pit, so we'll just leave them there because they're going to just starve and die down there. And so, hey, let's go to Sodom and let's go to Gomorrah and let's ransack their cities. And so that's exactly what they do. They raid their cattle. They raid their refrigerators, if I can put it that way. They raid their pantries. They take everything that they could, and they take everybody captive back with them, including Lot, Abram's nephew. See, Lot was now dwelling in Sodom, is what verse 12 tells us. It says, and they took Lot, Abram's brother, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and he departed. And so now here you've got Lot, who in the previous chapter lifted up his eyes toward the east and viewed the plains of Sodom, that they were beautiful and they were everything he wanted. And it said in chapter 13 that he pitched his tent toward Sodom. He was on the outskirts. He wasn't in Sodom. And chapter 13 tells us that the people in Sodom were wicked and exceeding sinners before the Lord. And so let's just say that was not the most godly city. It maybe would have been like their Vegas. You know, we call Vegas Sin City. That's what everybody would have known Sodom as. And so he pitches his tent towards Sodom, but now it's telling us that now he's living in Sodom. Now he's got a house in Sodom. He is well established in that city. And so as a result, these kings come through, they take him, and they take him captive. See, Sodom promised to be far superior than what God could have given Lot in the land of Canaan. That's what it appeared to be, and yet it still delivered captivity. He still ended up captured. He didn't have the peace he thought he'd have. He didn't have the security he thought he'd have. And now he doesn't have the wealth that he thought that he would have in Sodom. And that's the way that it works, that the world has a way of offering you the wealth, the peace, the security, and the pleasure that you could ever want and ever desire. But far too often, the world's wealth and peace and security will just deliver spiritual captivity. And that's what happened in Lot's life. Well, Lot's capture landed Abram right in the middle of a conflict that had nothing to do with him. See, and that happens in our lives too, that when we make selfish choices, I mean, this is the nephew. He should have deferred to his uncle, but instead he said, I want the well-watered plains. He made a selfish choice. And when we do that, what we can end up doing is dragging our families into a conflict they shouldn't have to be in. And that's what happened with Lot here. And so Abram's dragged into this. It tells us in verse 13 that a person came and had escaped and told Abram that Lot had been taken captive. And it tells us that Abram had made a confederacy, an alliance, not with kings, but with neighbors, fellow farmers. A man by the name of Mamre, a man by the name of Eshcol, and a man by the name of Aner. They were confederate with him. And so what Abram ends up doing is when he finds out that his nephew has been captured, he brings out 318 of his trained servants. They're household servants, household employees, work in the farm, work in the cattle. I mean, these are not warriors. These are not soldiers here. These are farmers. But it does say that he gave them at least a little bit of training. But why does it say specifically it was 318 of them? And it says they were born in his home. What this means is they had no formal training before. All the training they had was Abram. Well, let's think about it this way. This is 318 servants along with Abram, along with his neighbors. And they're going to battle against an alliance of 4 powerful kings. What that's telling us is that Abram has every disadvantage imaginable in this situation. There's no way this is a battle that, logically speaking, he should win. And yet what he does is he goes and it says that he divides his men up, and he smote this 4-king alliance from the valley of Sheva, which would have been near Jerusalem. And he drives them north through a town called Hazor and Dan until they come to Damascus in Syria. That's about 200 miles away from where Abram began the battle. And so you've got this farmer with his pitchforks and all of his servants and the neighbors and whatever their farm equipment is that they've got. I'm sure they had some swords and spears, but they're chasing these armies for 200 miles before they finally get out of the land. It's an amazing thing. And so Abram returns to the valley of Sheva there outside of Jerusalem, along with Lot, his goods, the rest of the people of Sodom who were taken captive. And that's quite a victory for a farmer, his neighbors, and 318 household servants. Well, after the slaughter of Kedorlaomer, verse 17 says, and the king of Sodom went out to meet him. So evidently he somehow got out of that tar pit. Doesn't tell us how, but he did. He escaped. And it says that he went to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Kedorlaomer and the kings that were with him in the valley of Sheva, which is the king's dale. And so what's going to happen here, this is a structural thing in Scripture, that what they would do is they would write in chiasms for the sake of emphasis. They didn't have bold print and italics and those kind of things. And so what they would do is they would do it in parallels, where you would have the outsides are the same, and then these are the same, and these are the same, and it leads to the central focus. And the figure in the middle, the person in the middle, the account in the middle is the most important part of it. And so this account starts with the king of Sodom and it ends with the king of Sodom. But in the middle is a man by the name of Melchizedek. Melchizedek was the king of Salem. And now Melchizedek, what he's going to do is Abram's going to have 2 offers here. He's going to have an offer from the king of Sodom. And then he's got this offer from Melchizedek, the king of Salem, which would be Jerusalem. And so that's Salem there. And so what happens here is Melchizedek, it says in verse number 18, that he brought forth bread and wine. Now that was sustenance for Abram after a long battle. This king comes to him and he says, I'm going to give you some bread and some wine. That's also the food of royalty. It was like he held a banquet, a feast, a celebration. There was a special event going on here. And it tells us this at the end of verse 18, that he was the priest of the Most High God. That is God's name, El Elyon. El is the short for Elohim, which is the creator God, the strong one, kind of a general name for God. But he tacks that Elyon onto the end, which means to be superior in rank, to surpass all others, to rule over everything else. And so he's saying that you look at the gods of the land, all these false gods of the Canaanites, somehow the king of Jerusalem here, who would have been a Jebusite, he came to realize that the God of Abraham was the Most High God, that he was the one who was over all. And so now about this Melchizedek, he is a real historical person. I want to start there. He is actually a Canaanite king who was acquainted with the God of Abraham. Now, Melchizedek is often viewed as a Christophany. That would be a theological term for an Old Testament appearance of the Lord Jesus Christ. But that's not what the Scripture teaches, okay? When you study about Melchizedek, there are two other times he's mentioned. One is in Psalm 110, which is a messianic psalm. David is writing about the Messiah who would come, and he says, "Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." After the order there would mean the resemblance, that there's going to be some likeness his, that what David was really saying was that he's going to be a type of who the Messiah is. That's who Melchizedek was. Well, what exactly does that mean? Well, I'm thankful that Hebrews 7 elaborates on that a little bit. And it says that thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, and it speaks specifically about the genealogical side of things. This is the only Old Testament account, historical account that we have of Melchizedek. All it tells us is he's the king of Salem. Doesn't tell us where he came from. Doesn't tell us where he went afterwards. All it does is he shows up and he's gone. And that's what the parallel is to Jesus Christ. That Jesus is an eternal being. That while he was born in human flesh, he had no beginning. He had no ending. He is equal with God. He is the exact same person as God. That's what the idea there of Melchizedek is. But this is significant for his historical part because of what his name means. His name is Melchizedek. Consists of two Hebrew words. The first being Melech, which is king, and then Sedek, which is righteousness. And so it's saying that even here in a Jebusite territory, in a Canaanite territory, in a predominantly wicked area, there was a king of righteousness who ruled over the city of peace, Salem. And so you have this man Melchizedek. He's a king of righteousness. Contrast that with the king of Sodom. We're told that his name is Bera, and the word Bera means son of evil. And so you can see the face-off here between these two kings and their two offers to Abram. He's got an offer from the king of righteousness and peace, and he's got an offer from the son of evil and burning. That's what Sodom means. So he's got these two offers here, but what I want to point out is that it says he was the priest of the Most High God. What that means is that Melchizedek was one who went between man and God. That's what a priest was. He was a mediator. He was one who was able to speak to another on behalf of God and to speak to God on behalf of another. And so he was a priest of the Most High God. And this Canaanite king Melchizedek, he reveals to Abram three truths about God that I want to show you here. It says in verse number 19, and he blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram of the Most High God." He's revealing to him here, the God who showed up to you in chapter 12, the God who showed up to you at the end of chapter 13, the God who's promising all these blessings to you. I want you to know He's the Most High God. He surpasses all others. He is the ruler over heaven and earth. He is the ruler over every other God, every other king, every sovereign in this entire universe. He is the Most High God. And then look what it says at the end of verse 19. The possessor of heaven and earth. That means that God has it all. He owns it all. And He distributes it to all whom He will, as He will. And so He says that He's the possessor of heaven and earth. And then it says in verse 20, and blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand. He says, Abram, I've got one more thing to reveal to you here. You know that victory was not by your hands. That victory over those four powerful kings didn't come because of the military prowess of your 318 soldiers. It certainly didn't come because of your alliance with your neighbors. He said, no, I want you to know that the Most High God, the supreme authority, the supreme ruler, He is the one who delivered your enemies into your hands and gave you the victory. See, the Most High God, here's really what Melchizedek's trying to get across, is that because he was serving the Most High God was all Abram needed. He didn't need another king. He didn't need another alliance. He didn't need help here. No, he had the God who was the possessor of heaven and earth, the God who promised to give him a heritage, to give him the land, to provide for all of his needs, to bless his life. And it was the Most High God who protected him and gave him the peace and gave him the security and gave him the victory. The Most High God was all Abram needed. I just want to briefly point out Abram's response. It says in the end of verse 20, and he gave him tithes of all. See, when people look at tithe as a bad thing, there's no teaching in the New Testament about it. That was part of the Old Testament law. Well, this precedes the law, and I'll agree with you, there's nothing that specifically says anything about tithe in the New Testament. But what we've got to understand about tithe is that tithe is not a law. Tithe is not a rule. It's not a regulation. It's not a mandate. Here's what tithe is according to Abram's account here. Tithe is the proper response of worship to a God who has blessed you and delivered you. That's what tithe is. And so it says that he gave them tithes of all. And it's saying this, God, I recognize that everything I have today is a blessing from your hand. And without you, I wouldn't have a thing. And so I want to give a tenth back to you. See, the reality is that God is the possessor of heaven and earth. That means it's all his. You know what that means? Everything you have is actually his. And the amazing thing is that when you give 10% back to God, he lets you have 90% of it. I mean, think about it that way. And so when we really think about tithing, failing to tithe is actually quite a revelation of our hearts toward God. Are we thankful? Do we realize he's the one who has blessed us richly? It's a proper response of worship. And so he gives him the tithes of all, and Melchizedek returns to Salem. And now the king of Sodom steps forward with his offer in verse number 21. It says, and the king of Sodom said unto Abram, give me the persons and take the goods to thyself. And so Abram had gone and he had regathered the people and he had reclaimed all of their goods. So now there's all these possessions here, and the king of Sodom says, just give me the people. You can tell kind of the wickedness and the selfishness of the heart there. I want to make sure I've got my servants. I want to make sure I've got my soldiers. I want to make sure that he's treating people like property. That's not right. But he says, you give me the persons and you can have all the goods. You can have it all. Well, what does Abram do? Look at verse 22. He says, and Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldst say, I have made Abram rich. And he says, we'll just keep what the young men have eaten. They've earned their food at least. But I don't want anything from you. See, the problem with the king of Sodom's offer was just like Sodom did with Lot. It offered Abram something right now, something tangible, something of wealth, something of possession, something of material good. It offered him something in this very moment that would actually lead him into captivity, just like it did with Lot. Well, what do you mean by that? When Abram says, lest thou shouldst say, I have made Abram rich, he said, I want to make sure that you don't come back to me later and you say, hey, remember everything I gave you? You owe me now. You have to go to fight with me. You have to go to battle with me. You've got to pay tribute to me because of everything that I gave you. And Abram says no. What happens here is the king of Sodom, he's extending his hands out to Abram. And he's saying, look at all the goods I have. Look at everything that could be yours. And you know what Abram does? He lifts his hands up to God. And he said, I lift up mine hand to the Most High God. He's bigger than you. He's better than you. He's stronger than you. He's wealthier than you. I don't lift up my hands out to your goods. I lift my hands up to the Most High God, the one who's the possessor of heaven and earth. He's saying to this king, when I look at everything that God has and I look at what you're offering, it doesn't even compare. Your offering has lost its appeal when compared to what God has to offer my life. He says, I'll not take anything. And so he refuses. And what he ends up doing is he looks at this situation, and yes, the promises of God, they're still off in the distance. He can't tangibly see them right now, while the goods of Sodom are all there right before his eyes. And yet, what he came to understand and believe was that the future promises of God were far superior than the present goods of Sodom. So here's our question. Why did Abram refuse the goods of Sodom and choose to rest in the sufficiency of God? The reason why is because he saw what God offered was far superior to the offer of the king of Sodom. It was far superior. So that's the message. What was this message to mean for the Israelites who were reading this for the first time? Those who had just conquered the land. Those who are now living in the land. What were they supposed to get as they read from this particular situation? They're trying to live in the land according to God's law, while the Canaanites were living in the land with all their gods, their economic and religious systems, and all their alliances and armies and all those things. And so what were they supposed to get out of this? Here's what they were supposed to get: that the Most High God promised Israel a far superior blessing than the surrounding nations if they would simply rest in His sufficiency. See, the surrounding nations had a lot to offer: peace, wealth, security. Their swords, their spears, their chariots, their horses. They offered protection. Their economies were flourishing and promised wealth untold. They offered every act of pleasure, even in their religious systems, every act of pleasure that would satisfy the appetites of their flesh. And Israel would be gravely tempted to go after everything they could see right before their eyes, to immerse themselves into the culture, to claim the goods of the land surrounding them, to join affinity and form their own alliances in exchange for material wealth, peace, and security. But what God wants them to understand is, listen, who is the God of your nation? It is the Most High God. It is the one who is superior to all of those kings. It is the possessor of heaven and earth, the one who has everything that you need. I can provide for you. I can protect you. I can be everything you need right there in the moment if you'll simply rest in my sufficiency. And see, that is a message that still preaches to us to this day. See, what God has to offer you, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, has something to offer you that is far superior to anything that this world system would want to give you today. See, this world is going to put its hands out to you, and it's going to say, look at everything I have to offer you. You might be offered a lucrative job that will provide some more financial peace, and it'll allow you to put some steak on the table instead of chicken, and it'll allow you to have a bigger TV on your stand, and a bigger car in your garage, and a bigger house, and it'll provide you with all of these things. It'll afford you with more tropical vacations, more time off, better retirement. And when you lift up your eyes on that well-watered job, it says, look at everything that I have to give you. But just like Lot, what you can find out is that job might be a job that takes you captive, that enslaves you, that keeps you away from your family, that keeps you out of church and serving the Lord, that takes you away from even your time with God because you're so busy and so consumed with making that next bonus and making that next promotion that it just owns your life. There might be some person at work, some person at the store, some person at the gym who catches your eye, and they offer you a good time, and they offer you a one-night stand, and they say that it's going to be everything that you want it to be, and we'll keep it under wraps, and you won't have to worry about that. It won't get out. Everything will be fine. It'll satisfy everything that you're looking for, and yet what it does is it leaves you captive. It leaves you captive. A secret life, alienation from your spouse, a broken relationship with God. That website or that dating app that promises the quick fix, the moment of pleasure. That one moment of pleasure can hold you captive for decades, can ruin your mind to where you can't even look at a person the same way again without your mind wandering off. And it can lead you to do things that you never thought imaginable, things you never saw yourself doing before. Why? Because you looked at the goods of Sodom as they were being laid out before you, the goods of wickedness, the goods of this world system, and you said, that's really what I want. That's really what can satisfy. That's really what will make the difference in my life. Before you know it, it leads you captive. If I can preach to my kids for a minute, that M&M bag that's on the countertop that promises to satisfy your sweet tooth, to make you happy, to give you everything that you really wanted. I mean, you're starving. You think you're going to die if you don't just get one M&M. You're saying, I want it. But what's the problem? You know, Mom and Dad said, ask. See, we'll give you food if you don't steal. But you're looking at it and you're saying, but that bag is so shiny. And I know the treasures of gold that are inside that bag. And I just want to go for it. And you look around. Mom's upstairs. Dad's at work. I think I can get away with it. You go there, you crack that bag open. You take that M&M and you put it in your mouth. And you're thinking, I got away with it. Zip that thing back up. You walk away and you're like, yes, I got what I want. But there's a problem. You know you did wrong. You know Mama's got super spidey senses and is just going to know it happened. And now you don't have a clean conscience. And now you're having to lie to cover up. And what you find is that tiny little peanut butter filled M&M that you thought would make everything in life perfect has led you captive. It's captured you. Then you don't get any more for a while. Or then you don't get to watch TV. Or then you don't get to play with a game. And now you're handcuffed. It's like you're in prison. It's easy for us to understand that with children, isn't it? And yet as adults, that happens to us nearly on a daily basis. There's something out there that this world holds its hands out to us and it says, I promise you this will be everything that you want it to be if you'll just take it. And God steps into your life and He says, refuse it. Rest in my sufficiency. What I have for you is better than that. It's better than you could ever dream. See, the God that we serve, He's still the Most High God. He's still the possessor of heaven and earth. He still has all the riches and all the glory of heaven. He still owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Everything He still possesses, it's still in His sovereign control. And here's the best part. He wants to bless your life with it. He wants you to have a good life. He wants you to have a good marriage. He wants you to have a good job, the kind that's not going to enslave you, the kind that's going to afford time in a relationship with Him, the kind that's going to afford you time with your kids and time with your spouse and to be able to go out on dates with them and have time for that. He wants you to have that kind of job. He wants you to have the kind of marriage that is deep, that is intimate and special, where you know each other like nobody else does and you actually enjoy spending time together. You know you can have a marriage like that? You can if you do it God's way. If you wait and you rest in His sufficiency instead of going after the goods of the land. If you'll rest in God's sufficiency, He'll do everything that you could ever want Him to do. He offers you a relationship that's pure, one that's chaste, one that doesn't leave you with regret, one where that person challenges your spiritual life, one where they help you grow in Christ and they help you become closer to God and they help correct you when you get out of the way and when you're doing things or saying things or going places you shouldn't go. He wants you to have that kind of relationship that helps you grow closer to Him. And I also want you to know this. He's still a God who can deliver you from the captivities of your past pursuits. See, Jesus willingly laid down His life for you on the cross of Calvary. Why would He do that? to deliver you, to rescue you. Because He saw you in your broken condition, your inability to do what's right, your inability to keep the law of God and live perfectly before Him, what His holiness demands, what His justice requires. He saw you in that condition and He said, my justice demands that I must judge sin. But instead of judging their sin upon them, I'm going to judge their sin upon myself. And He came and He was born in a baby's body, and He grew and He went through everything that we went through in our lives, all the cuts of childhood and all the bruises and all the spats with his brother. And he was always right, though. His brothers were always wrong. But he went through all that, and you know what? He was despised. He was rejected by those He had healed, those He had loved, those He had come to die for. And He went and He suffered on that cross. But the reason all behind it was according to God's plan. Why? That you might be delivered and rescued from your sin. That's a deliverance we can't get on our own. That's 318 soldiers going against 4 alliances. It's impossible for us. But it's something God promised to do, and it's something that God will do in your life if you'll rest in His salvation. He'll deliver you. The Most High God is the kind of God you can call on when your finances go awry. He's the kind of God that you can call on when you're in your deepest distress. He's the kind you can call on when you need to be saved, when you need to be rescued from those past mistakes, and when you need to be delivered from the captivating nature of this world. He will be everything you need in every moment of need. And His call to you today is refuse the goods of the world and rest in my sufficiency. And I will be there, and I'll be everything you need. So I want to ask you this. What's the offer in your life tonight? Right here, right now. What's going on in your life that promises you the world, but has the potential to capture you? Is it a job? Is it a relationship? Is it a move to greener pastures? Is it a particular friend in your life? Well, instead of holding out your hands to this world and saying, sure, you need to lift up your hands to the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth, and just say, He's all I need. And I'm going to stay right here. I'm going to be with who I should be with. And I'm going to serve Him, and I'm going to love Him and focus on growing my relationship with Him. Why? Because I know He is sufficient. If you've already accepted the offer, and it's already compromised your life, you see it plain and clear in the consequences. It may be that you're secretly shackled in a way that nobody knows. I want to tell you that God knows. In spite of the fact He knows, He still wants to deliver you. I've got a song that's been going through my head over the last couple of hours. Just as I am, I ran to Him, and mercy took me in. Just as I am, and He forgave my sin. Oh, the way He's changing my heart proves that He loves me too much to leave me just as I am. See, He'll receive you just as you are tonight, with whatever baggage you may have, with whatever shackles you may have around your wrists. He'll receive you just as you are, but expect this. He doesn't plan to leave you that way. He wants to deliver you. He wants to free you, and He wants to save your soul if you'll trust in Him. The Most High God offers a blessing in your life that is far superior to the world's blessing if you'll just rest in His sufficiency. Lord, we come to You tonight and we thank You for the truth of Your word. Thankful You're a God who comes to us just as we are. You break off those shackles through the blood of Christ. You cleanse us, forgive us, redeem us, and then You change us. That's the greatest blessing we could ever have in life, is that the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, would enter our world to redeem our sin. Oh God, may we rest in you. And if you came and were willing to suffer on the cross on our behalf, what is there in our life that we shouldn't lift up our hands unto you and say, God's all I need? Help us to rest in your sufficiency and to refuse the goods. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.